If you're an Oracle DBA or an apps DBA working on eBusiness Suite, PeopleSoft, JD Edward, but new to Oracle Cloud, then today's episode is for you. Welcome to episode 12 of weekly video series with me, Atul Kumar, from Team K20 Academy, where we help you in your journey to Oracle Cloud. In this episode, I'm going to share first lesson of our DBA to Cloud DBA live interactive training on Oracle's Gen 2 Cloud that we launched last week. But first, a big shout out to Mithun Madhavdas from my Oracle Cloud Architect certification program who last week cleared exam 100932. So big congratulations to him for becoming an Oracle certified cloud architect. Welcome, Mithun, for our inner mastermind circle of Oracle certified cloud consultants. Now, if you are not yet cloud certified and wish to know more about this certification exam, like what topics to expect and how to prepare for this exam, then go and check it out at k20academy.com / 1Z093211, where 1Z0932 is the certification exam number. So this episode 12 is in continuation from my previous two episodes, that's episode 10 and 11, where in 10th episode I covered how to create your Oracle database on Oracle's Gen 2 Cloud, that's OCI. So in that episode, I covered how you can create a database on Oracle Cloud, and I also gave you a task to create that database yourself. Then in the next episode 11, I covered how that connectivity works from internet to the database deployed on public subnet. We looked at things like internet gateway that's defined at VCN level, and then we looked at routing tables for connections coming from internet to the internet gateway, and then from internet gateway onto this public subnet where database server is running. We also looked at the security list that you deploy or configure at a subnet level in which your database server is running. So how do you open the database listener 1521 or the server or SSH port 22 on which the database server is running? So if you have not watched them previous two episodes, go and watch them out at k20academy.com / 10 and k20academy.com / 11. Make sure you create your first database and then look at the connectivity because you learn when you do those tasks on Oracle Public Cloud. Now, since posting these episodes, I got a lot of emails mentioning they are beginner in cloud. So they're still new to the cloud and where they can start learning this cloud from a beginner's point of view. So last week, we also launched new batch of our training, how to go from DBA to an Oracle Cloud DBA in 6 weeks. And a lot of you also asked if they can get glimpse of what to expect or what they should learn and in what order. So while we were doing the first day live interactive session with our cloud expert Rajiv, I thought why not we share the lesson one of day one from this training. So our cloud DBA instructor Rajiv, he will first start with the 9 modules that we cover in this training. So you can use these 9 modules in this order if you want to go from a DBA to cloud DBA. He then touch base with Oracle Cloud Service Model, and this is the first thing you should learn if you're just starting out in cloud. And if you're a DBA, apps DBA, administrator, or anyone working on these lines, then you should focus on two main areas, which is infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. After completing these service models, then next he talks about OCI and OCI Classic. So Oracle has two versions. Version 1, which is Gen 1 Cloud, that's Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Classic, and then Gen 2, which is Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So if you've just started out, you should be focusing on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. OCI Classic is being phased out. If you're a new customer or if you're just starting out, then you'll be working on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. After covering this OCI and OCI Classic, then he's going to cover about the various services that are part of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. These are the building blocks and database is going to run or will be using these services. So things like compute, where there are two type of compute, bare metal or virtual machine. There are storage like object storage, block storage, file storage service, or local NVMe. Then networking, things like VPN, fast connect, virtual cloud network, and so on. And once he explains about these OCI services, then he will cover two main categories of databases. That's first user managed database that includes bare metal database or databases running on bare metal. He will also cover databases running on virtual machine, that's VM database, and then Exadata Cloud Service, all part of user managed database. And then second type is of autonomous database, in which there are two categories, ATP and ADW. So let's listen to our Cloud DB expert, Rajiv.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Atul, for the great introduction. And hopefully, we'll all have a great journey learning cloud. And whoever is new, you have a lot to learn. And we'll get started for today. All the previous, batches, they have new things to learn as well. So let's get started for today's agenda. And we will try to introduce what we're going to cover in this course, quickly go over the course modules. In module one, which is what we're going to cover today, we'll talk about database on cloud. We'll talk about the overview and architecture. And then we will move on to the fundamentals that is needed from an Oracle Cloud Infrastructure perspective that you need to know when you learn database services in OCI. Some of you might already be aware of these fundamentals, but it is a good refresher for you to know what these are and how well these have been changed in conjunction with database service. And then we will move on to creating a database in OCI. Databases in OCI is termed as DB system. So what DB system is and how do you create a database in OCI? That's what we will cover in module 3. And then we will look at the network and security from a database perspective in OCI. Networking is one of the key fundamentals from a cloud computing perspective as well. So most of the DBAs would really need to know what networking is, and you would have a fair idea about networking when you've dealt with Oracle RAC or maybe ASM. Some of those concepts would help, but then this is something that any cloud vendor or any cloud provider does today from a networking perspective. And it's very much important that you understand the importance of networking and also security from a DB perspective. So we will get into that as well. And then once we are ready to, go to the next level wherein we've created the database, we've understood the core underpinnings of how does it work in the background, or what are the key capabilities that you need to know from a networking and security perspective, we are ready to manage the databases in OCI. So what do we do from terminating an instance, starting an instance, stopping an instance? How do we deal with such kind of management capabilities? And along with that comes patching a database system in OCI. How do we do patching, both from command line perspective and from the console? And most importantly, most of the DBA's favorite topic, backup and restore. How do we do backup and restore operations on a database, and that was specific to DB systems? Then monitoring a database, performance management. So another aspect of DBA is to monitor the database as it is up and running. What tools do you have to manage and monitor databases on OCI? How does it differ from on-premises world? What tools do you have and how do you monitor them? How do you configure monitoring? How do you enable monitoring tools? All that is an important aspect as well. And once you're done with that, important aspect to learn is migrating databases to the cloud. That's something that you have to learn, and that's a hot topic. Lift and shift your databases to the Oracle cloud. What are the different methods that Oracle offers? What are the different methods that you should be aware of when moving from one cloud to the other? And intricacies with respect to downtime management, how effectively can you move from on-prem to Oracle cloud? What are the DR capabilities? All that would be covered here. So that's about the course modules. All right, so module agenda for today. We'll discuss about cloud service models, maybe quickly brush upon our basics in terms of what this means to us. Infrastructure as a service difference between OCI and OCI Classic. OCI Classic has become a legacy, or is going to be a legacy sooner. And then we'll get into the OCI core services. Once we know about this, we understand that OCI would be your next generation cloud or generation 2, wherein you are going to deploy your databases. And that becomes the topic wherein you need to understand the difference between a user managed database and an autonomous database. User managed database is what we would cover along the duration of this course. Autonomous database is out of scope for this particular course. Licensing model applicable to user managed databases, but quickly touch upon the applicability of that from an autonomous perspective as well, where applicable. We'll discuss about the licensing types. What do you mean by universal credit? What does it mean to you from a licensing model? And if you have questions around bring your own license, can I bring my on-prem license to cloud? How does it impact my licensing? That's what we will look at here. And then you will have the next section, which Atul was talking about, autonomous database overview, which is basically about autonomous transaction processing and autonomous data warehouse, which we'll dealt with separately in a separate section. User managed databases, we'll go in deep, wherein we'll talk about what do you mean by user managed databases and what are the different types of editions, versions. We have three types: virtual machine, bare metal, and Exadata cloud service. So this is basically branded as VM, bare metal, and Exadata cloud service under the umbrella of user managed databases. You need to understand the key capabilities offered in terms of editions and versions. That's what we will cover. And we'll also have an enterprise architecture summary, how the entire stack would be applicable to you. How do you actually deploy your applications from an enterprise perspective? What does it mean to you from a networking perspective? How do you get that from a bird's eye perspective, not drilling down to the details? Then we'll move on to subscribe to Oracle Cloud. How do you access Oracle Cloud? How do you experience the OCI console? And then from there, how do you navigate to My Services dashboard? Some of these topics, if you're new, these are all new buzzwords to you, but don't worry, we'll cover them. And as said, we are just discussing the agenda for this particular module. So it's just introducing you to what we are going to cover. Cloud concepts, service models, difference between OCI and OCI classics, and also different services. So this is something that I would quickly touch upon. What do you mean by a cloud service model? In a traditional world, when you talk about on-premises data or on-premises data center, what happens is you have to manage applications, you have to manage middleware, you have to manage operating system, you have to manage your database, and maybe storage and networking, all of them in a siloed fashion. And somebody has to actually architect these pieces together and stitch these pieces together and give it to you or deliver it to you. And that's what happens in traditional on-premises world, wherein you had multiple people working in silos, and they would make this work. But on the other hand, in the case of a cloud, you have to deal with models like infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service would allow you to automate the entire pieces, right from virtualization, server storage, and networking, wherein you don't bother about how these are being provisioned or patched or how these are being handled or managed, all from manageability and from a usability perspective, which means that with a click of a button, you are able to get a hardware which has virtualization enabled, which has storage enabled, which has networking enabled. You just use that hardware wherein you have an operating system provisioned on top of it. Now, with that infrastructure, you decide what you want to run on top of that. Do you want to run a middleware application? Do you want to run maybe Java applications on top of it? Or maybe you want to deploy an Apache Tomcat, or maybe deploy a database and maybe tie that to an application. And how do you deal with that is up to you. Only thing that you get is the infrastructure, basically the underlying networking, storage, and the hardware that you have to deal with. That's something that you mean by infrastructure as a service. Now, on the other hand, if you want to do platform as a service, wherein you want to take it to the next level, you not only want to rent a hardware or with a click of a button to provision an infrastructure which includes network, storage, and servers, but also want to automate the provisioning of your platform. The platform in this case, a big example is database. So you want to actually provision a database with the click of a button. If you're DBA, then in the traditional world, what you do is you install the database by invoking run installer and then invoke DBCA, create the database. That's not there in the case of platform as a service. All that has been handled and automated behind the scene. All you get is what you ask for. You ask for a database which is of workload type OLTP, which is of workload type data warehouse, or which is of workload type mixed, and you give the configurations. It's all ready to use with a click of a button. What you do is now you deal with the applications. You want to write your own PL SQL packages. You want to deploy your applications in another infrastructure, which is a compute, and then you want to make sure that these two things talk to each other. The infrastructure talks to the database, which is a platform as a service. That's something that you could get. And beyond that, if you want to automate the entire piece, you do not want to write any code. you do not want to own any hardware, or you do not want to own any software as such. You want to get everything at one shot in the form of an application, and that is where software as a service comes into picture. The application could be an HRM service, or it could be an HCM service, or it could be a supply chain management service. All that will be given to you with a click of a button. This is nothing but software as a service. In some way or the other, we have been using software as a service. Gmail or Yahoo is an important or excellent example of using software as a service. So this is, in a nutshell, the difference between traditional infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service model. Now comes a brief introduction about Oracle Infrastructure as a Service, which is the backbone for enabling any kind of platform as a service. So if you look at any vendor for that matter, you see that most of the vendors would have started with infrastructure as a service to start with. There are vendors who would have only pure play software as a service model, but in general, cloud as such means it started off with infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service is something where you run your applications, you run your platform. So that's the backbone for any cloud for that matter, whoever is providing that. In the case of Oracle, Oracle has two choices. One is the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which is the Generation 2 infrastructure. And the next one is the OCI Classic, which is becoming a legacy now. As you have seen earlier, infrastructure as a service means getting provisioned with hardware, which includes your storage, network, and your compute, which is your CPU and memory. And how do you automate all these things together? And how well can that coexist with your data center? The way in which the OCI Classic has been deployed, or the technology that has been used with OCI Classic, is way different from what is used in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Even though technically you get the same experience, or you essentially rent a hardware or an operating system or a networking paradigm, but the way in which the implementation is done in both these systems are completely different. And the usability of using infrastructure, usability of provisioning your network, usability of managing your network is way superior in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And that's why it is called as the Generation 2 infrastructure. And that's the strategy that Oracle has going forward. And most of the applications you would see, or most of the platforms you would see, are moving towards OCI, and OCI Classic has become a legacy. Now, as I said, how do I differentiate between that? From a UI perspective, you have a clear demarcation about OCI and OCI Classic. So if you look at the database world, if you go to My Services Portal, again, we're jumping the guns here. What is My Services Portal? Newbies, you probably might not be knowing, but I'm just giving you a glimpse of what is there. There are clear ways to differentiate between OCI and OCI Classic instances. And going forward, any new cloud deployment that you create would be by default created in an OCI based system. If you are already dealing or working with a customer who has classic based deployments, then this topic is for you, wherein you might want to deal with classic based deployments. How do I understand that? And you have a capability to understand or differentiate between compute classic, database classic, database on OCI, and compute. That's clearly visible in your usage portal or the My Services portal. Again, the differences between how the storage is implemented, how the compute shape and deployment patterns are implemented, and also the key important aspect that differentiates OCI Classic and OCI, I would say, is networking. So networking is something that is far superior, wherein you have something called as the virtual cloud network, which is as good as extending your corporate data center, and effectively you can connect from your corporate data center to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Network in a much better fashion compared to OCI Classic. Now, what are the core
Rajiv,
services that
sorry, just wanted to add one thing here. So till recently, there was no provision to migrate easy migration from Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Classic to OCI. But Oracle recently released, I think in last week only, how to migrate from a workload from an OCI Classic to OCI. So if you're working on this, I suggest you start looking at migrating workload as well, because there will be a lot of work going to come
when migrating your workload from OCI Classic to OCI for existing customers who are working on that. Just a tip on over there. And again, sorry to bother. Over to you, Rajiv.
Sure, thank you. So what are the core OCI services when you look at that from an infrastructure as a service perspective? The key things that you need to have in mind is you need to have a compute. The compute could be either a bare metal or a virtual machine. Bare metal is something wherein you own the complete compute. Virtual machine is something wherein a hypervisor sits in between, and that has been shared between multiple tenants. And the new generation deployment patterns like Kubernetes or containerization or application containerization is something that is available as part of the service. And then from an infrastructure, core infrastructure perspective, you need to deal with storage. You have a storage in terms of block volumes and object volumes. Networking, you need to have a core network, which is your backbone to it. So you need to have a virtual cloud network, which is able to extend your corporate data center to the Oracle Cloud. And how effectively can I secure that? And that's where VPN or virtual private network and firewall or security rules comes into picture. Now, in order to have access to an application, you also need to have a load balancer. So if you are deploying a 3-tier architecture or an application, again, these days people don't deploy a monolithic application. They deploy something called as a microservice. Regardless, whether it is a mobile-based application or maybe the next generation web-based application, you still need to hit a load balancer. So you need to have load balancer to route your traffic in an appropriate fashion and also manage the microservice deployment, which then talks to your container services. Now, how do I handle access to all this? That's where identity and access management comes into picture, which is the core IAM capability. How do I access these services? Do I have access to all these services, or should I give access to all these services to everyone? That's where IAM or identity and access management comes into picture. Now, from a DBA perspective, you probably need only access to DBAS, which is database as a service. Maybe to a certain extent, you might need to have some visibility around networking, not the complete visibility. And also you need to have access to the block volumes and object volumes. And if you are a small shop, if you're dealing with some applications and some application deployments from a DevOps perspective, maybe you need to have access to some of the VMs or the compute. That's all you would be given. And how do I control access to that? That's through identity and access management. Now, for core administrators, they would also need to do billing and metering. That's again now clearly visible or made applicable as part of the core OCI console. Earlier it used to be there in a separate console called as My Services. And everything is REST based. So if you don't like the console, if you want to build things on your own or integrate it into your existing maybe a ServiceNow console or maybe any other console that you have or have been using with for automation, you can do that as well. So that's in a nutshell about core OCI services. Again, this is in a different way that is depicted over here. To reiterate, you have compute, you have storage, and networking. These are the key backbones. And built on top of that is you have containers and Kubernetes, and then you have databases, which becomes a platform as a service. And then networking goes hand in hand with all the edge services, where you need to have DNS, VPN, and then Fast Connect, and also email services. Now, if you look at migration, you need to deal with something called as data movement. Most of the storage vendors come up with this concept of storage appliance, wherein you have a storage that has been shipped to your data center. You can copy your data and then ship it back to the cloud vendor. Oracle also has a similar technology. Or you can also create something called as a NAS gateway, which is like a storage appliance gateway as a plugin that allows you to connect your storage directly onto the Oracle storage. Now, beyond that, clouded customer, this has become a hot topic these days, and Oracle had called a clouded customer much even before other cloud vendors even thought about it. Amazon recently introduced clouded customer capabilities, but Oracle had been giving these services way beyond. And an important topic about this is that an important aspect to be considered about this is that clouded customer is still deployed in an OCI classic based system. The clouded customer from an OCI infrastructure perspective is not yet announced. And if you're working with customers who are deploying or planning to deploy Cloud Customer, again, it's very important probably that you need to have an understanding about OCI Classic based systems.
Well, that was the first part of our day one of a recent batch of DBA to Oracle Cloud DBA training. Now, if you want to hear more about this or would like to know more about the lesson two, that's about licensing options, then leave us a comment. And based on if there's an interest, we might open up the next lesson as well. So for the next week, I'm going to talk about a very exciting feature that Oracle introduced recently in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, that's auto scaling, where a new compute instance can automatically be provisioned or deprovisioned as load on server increases or decreases. And the most exciting part out of it is that this feature is also available for eBusiness Suite R12 running on OCI. So if you're an apps DBA and if you have deployed eBusiness Suite R12 on OCI, then you can leverage this auto scaling feature. You can configure your eBusiness Suite to use this feature so that as load on eBusiness Suite application tier increases, it automatically creates another instance of your application tier and automatically be also added into the load balancer. So you don't have to do any task. It automatically your application node adds, and as load on your application tier decreases, that additional node can automatically be deprovisioned and removed from the load balancer. So I'm very excited about this feature. We've just tested it for one of our customers. So that's the topic we are going to cover next week. Now, before you go, if you like today's video and if you know any DBAs who are just starting out their cloud journey, then don't forget to share this video with them. And be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube channel and our blog notification at k20nacademy.com/subscribe so that you get weekly update about any new features or new content related to Oracle Cloud. And I'll see you next Tuesday.